I think the overlooked one is quality. And what I mean by that is when you really think about everything from how we run meetings. So we take shortcuts. I don't do agendas all the time. I don't
Yeah.
capture the action items all the time. There's so many shortcuts we take there, but even our decision making, how deep does the customer research go? Or are we going off of one person said, hey, I talked to a guy yesterday? Or have we really done the deep research we need to truly understand the customer? And I think that's the other reason why we're not seeing ROI immediately. One is the hurdles to productivity that you outlined. But I think the second one is there's so much quality deficit that we have that we need to raise the bar, and AI will help us to raise that bar first. And then we'll start to see some of these other returns on our investment.
Today I'm joined by Melissa Reeve, the author of the upcoming book, Hyperadaptive, Rewiring the Enterprise to Become AI Native. And we're going to deconstruct what it actually takes to get AI adopted in large organizations. Melissa, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Happy to have you on and to learn about how enterprises are adopting AI. So first, can you tell me a little bit about your journey into this space? How did this book come about?
Yeah, so it like hit me like a ton of bricks on December 15th at 2 in the morning. I was tossing and turning with all of these thoughts in my head, and I thought, I gotta get this stuff down. So I took out this stack of index cards because I didn't feel like sitting in front of a computer, but it turned into this 134-page outline for a book. But lightning bolts often don't strike without some preparation. The storm is building behind. And so for about 8 months prior to that, I'd been noodling on this notion of what I was calling at the time automated execution pipelines. And this is directly tied to DevOps. So for those that are familiar with DevOps, that's what I would consider an automated execution pipeline. So we've taken that software delivery process and we automated it. And so we didn't have all these handoffs and delays. And I thought, aha, that's what's going to happen with AI in all these other parts of the organization. And so I reread the DevOps handbook, and that was one of the main foundations of the book.
That's fascinating. So can you walk me through what led you to reread the DevOps handbook? What position were you in that you were reading this and thinking about DevOps?
Yeah, that's awesome. So my background, although functionally is in marketing, I've sat at the intersection of marketing and technology and education. I was in Tokyo during college and studying the Toyota production system, and that was my introduction to lean and lean thinking, and it made a ton of sense to me at that time. Then there's a through line to Agile, which I discovered Agile marketing in 2011 and thought, oh, this is making a lot of sense too, this iterative, incremental approach. I landed in a company called Scaled Agile, and that was taking those Agile principles into the world's largest enterprise. I was surrounded by the world's experts in this field and really injected my thinking with not only how to scale, which is a little bit of John Kotter and leading change, a little bit of Peter Senge and how do you create a learning organization. And then the model, which is called SAFe, the Scaled Agile Framework, also injected DevOps into it. And we were just starting to toy with injecting AI into the Scaled Agile Framework. So it provided this really broad foundation of thinking about change in large enterprises. And then, of course, was in DevOps thinking was a key part of that as well.
So like you said, it provided a foundation. Before we talk about the analogy with DevOps, can you just unpack a little bit about what that foundation is? What did you learn with all these methods and these people that you mentioned about scaling? Like, what are the most important takeaways from that for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Change is hard is the first thing, and it gets harder the bigger the organization. So if you've got, 10,000 software developers, that's a lot harder to change than if you've got a small, nimble startup team because you've got all these processes in place and handoffs and subspecialties and subspecialties. So it's really about mobilizing the people. And I think we'll talk about it a little bit later, but there's this idea of a top-down mandate, which, you need leadership support, but it's often disconnected from the operational realities on the ground. And then there's this notion of a grassroots movement, which Agile was in a lot of cases, which is great, but then they often lack the positional authority to really get the budgets and to get wholesale change. So all of these frameworks were, how do you create these movements within organizations to move from the way you're operating now into a new way of operating in the future? And again, when I thought about AI, I thought, oh, that's what we're going to have to do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, for our audience that are maybe engineers or architects, can you talk a little bit more about that analogy? Like, what parallels do you see between automation of software delivery pipelines and these organizational automation AI that we're introducing now?
Sure. So when I think of DevOps and the transformation that happened there, I think about how software used to get delivered and how there was a time when software was so fragile that you would only release maybe once or twice a year because the impact was so big and you had to do so much testing and preparation. And how that's really compressed where now instead of having all of these handoffs, and you'll have to forgive me, your audience has to forgive me because again, I'm not a software developer by background. I've just been exposed to this over time. So when you think about that pipeline though, you've got the software development, you have your testing, your user acceptance testing, and then of course it's going over into operations. And all of the miscommunications and handoffs that happen to happen and how magical it was when we started thinking differently about that. And we started thinking about what if we were to do test-driven development, right? And what if we were to reverse some of the order and automate some of the testing and even automate deployment, how that really changed how we think about software delivery. And I thought the same thing's going to have to happen. And my mind, because I'm a marketer by trade, jumped to campaign delivery. And I could see this pipeline where now instead of having to have somebody who ideated the campaign and somebody who created the graphics and somebody who created the text and somebody who deployed the campaign, you could create these automations to deploy these campaigns very, very quickly and automatically. And all of a sudden, our ability to not only deploy quickly, but to test campaign, just multiple campaigns at once, really would change how that function operated.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And with the rise of, what we call CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous delivery, the idea is deploy often, deploy quickly, deploy on Fridays even, I mean,
Yeah.
that was the big thing, like don't deploy on a Friday because, you don't want to deal with an outage on a Friday, which I have definitely done before, causing me to miss a Broadway show. So, I mean, still maybe be careful about that. But the idea is that you should always be deploying and so that there's not these huge changes. And when we talk about, CI/CD, a lot of times, of course, it's a cultural shift, which I think you highlighted pretty well. But also, a lot of people in tech seem to, and just in general, people focus on the tooling. Like, what tool are you using? Are you using Argo? What are you using? And I think that a lot of times it's a cultural shift. I mean, tooling does definitely matter. You want to have good tools that are easy to use. But are you seeing the same pattern with AI? Are people investing a lot in tooling and lacking in cultural, or the other way around?
Yeah. I mean, it was fuzzy there for a while. Like, we definitely knew people were focused on the tools, and there's a new tool every moment. So it just is this explosion of tools. But even in enterprises where things are moving a little more slowly, we see this pattern where the board puts pressure on the organization, or maybe even just the organization puts pressure on itself. This AI thing is coming. It's huge. We've got to act. And so, what's the easiest way to act? I like to say shopping is the easy part, right? Like, you go out, you get a tool. So, I know so many organizations that have rolled out Copilot, and then they're sitting there waiting, tick tock, tick tock, with like, okay, well, why isn't the organization magically like reinventing itself. And I like to equate the moment of just rolling out Copilot and waiting to like the DOS prompt. So we bought everybody computers and we don't even have Windows yet. We just have like that green blinking cursor that is waiting for instructions. And we don't really even tell people what's going on. We just say, hey, we gave you this powerful new tool called a PC, and you've got to turn it on and do something with it. And people are just really lost. We've got to do more than just give them the tools.
That's a great point. Can you walk me through how your book addresses this problem? What is your solution to or your guide to this problem?
Yeah. So of course I come from this lean and agile background. So it's let's address this thing iteratively and incrementally. And we need to provide support structures. And I feel like that's one of the missing pieces. So in the beginning, I have 5 stages of the hyperadaptive model. And we're trying to get people from what I call a linear organization. So that's strategy to execution, concept to delivery, all of those handoffs and delays that happen through all of that into an AI native organization, which compresses both of those dimensions and has people sensing and responding and learning in real time. So we do that through 5 stages, the first of which is a foundational stage. So that is getting your AI councils and dynamic AI governance that is a network through the organization. So it looks a little bit different than how current governance happens. We spin up some foundational elements like that. We start identifying our AI leads, our AI pilots. I think a lot of people are there right now. They've spun up some governance. They have some champions identified. The piece they're missing is a programmatic or systematic support for those champions. Again, they're just kind of saying, you're a champion, like go out and spread the word. But we really need to empower these people to do that. And then as we move through the model, we start injecting AI into our current processes. And we spin up what I call an AI activation hub. And so, again, this systematic approach to supporting people as we're injecting AI into the workflows. And then we gradually move into this place where we're reinventing workflows and we start to introduce agents. When we do that, our workflows naturally should look different. We start to spin up something called an AI impact hub because we know that's going to have an impact on jobs and the types of jobs. We know this from DevOps, right? Like this whole new group of jobs emerged. So then toward the end, we start moving into orchestration and we start moving into this organization that can sense and respond. So it just gives you a sense of how we're
Yeah.
moving the organization gradually over time.
Yeah, I like that. And we'll go through some of that. So, one point you made is about sociology of workflows, and traditionally they're linear. Can you talk about what sociology of workflows mean and why this linear approach is no longer sufficient for AI?
Sure. So I feel like the the linear workflow is based in Taylorism. And John Winslow Taylor was the first guru of scientific management. And this goes all the way back to 1911. And what he invented in terms of management, you have to think about an assembly line. And there was the management class and the laboring class of people. And the management class, it was their job to identify the one best way of doing things and impart that knowledge onto the laboring class. And I bring this up because I feel like there's still ripples of this thinking that go through our organizations today, right? When we're thinking about workflows, everybody wants to debate the one best way of doing things. And there might not be just one best way. And that one best way might change over time. And I think the leading organizations have gotten out of this and they're in this mindset of like experimenting and continually adapting. And for those who have really truly adopted the CI/CD pipeline, are there, right? Let's continually deploy, continually experiment.
Yeah.
But I would dare say, and I'd be interested in your point of view. Like, what do you see? Do you see other parts of the organization that maybe are a little more stuck in the one best way of doing things?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on the history of the team. For example, like generally it's well known that Bloomberg is a pretty, like, I don't want to say old company, but it's older than some of these big tech, newer companies like Google and Facebook. So, and also it's financial services. So I can imagine there are some products that, are highly sensitive and maybe have to go through a more rigorous process and are slower. And maybe there's reasons for that, like you said, not one size fits all. And where there are some other applications like that we can just deliver quickly and always be updating on that. And I think that in a big organization, probably any big organization, there's a wide range of that depending on the product. But it's always easier to create something new that has
Yeah.
great principles and, like, practices than to shift something that's legacy onto that. So I think that's also a dynamic that's hard to change too.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's impacting organization is the legacy of functional specialization, and that's something that came about after World War II. There were traces of it before World War II, but really after World War II, as organizations started to expand and globalize, we started to see that functional specialization. And I like to say that you can't expect first century results with a 20th century operating model. And I feel like those functional specializations is another legacy approach to workflows that will probably get disrupted as AI starts to get more and more embedded in the organization.
Yeah, I think that your wording, like sociology of workflows, is so interesting because it's about people. Everything's so cultural, even though it's tech, even though it's code. It's about how we interpret it and how we use it. Yeah, I think that change is hard, as you mentioned. At my old company, when I was at a startup, we had a monolith of our service was just like a lot of code and everyone was committing. And so pushing that code was a bit dangerous and it was a lot all at once. So we had to do it slower, which means there's more code to change, and we had to all monitor it, and it was a big process, and I know there was a big push to break out of that monolith, but that effort was a huge effort and a lot of engineers' time just moving things around, which no engineer really wants to do that much of, you know? I
Right.
mean, with AI, it's probably a lot easier now to do that, but at that time, we didn't have Copilot that would write and edit code for us, so that part sociology about how people are, you know, introducing and managing these workflows. That's a very interesting concept that you mentioned.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think, that's now we're starting to get a little meta, right, about our work that, oh wow, this goes way back and it will require some adjustment rather than just rolling it out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so let's touch on that, like, just the part of rolling it out and, like, these initiatives because you mentioned, in your work that 80% of these AI initiatives are failing. So from what you've seen, why are they failing? What's the most common reason for that? Is it, like, some single point of failure, or is it an organizational one?
Yeah, I think it's a mix. That one, the 80% failure rate came from a RAND study. There were several reasons. One is that organizational readiness. So I think with AI, I don't want to tease AI apart. It's such a big word. Um, I want to talk about AI solutions that are maybe being coded internally. We're developing our own LLM, we're developing our own models. And then I feel like there's this, I've been calling it's not a great name, but I've been calling it junior IT. And it's this notion that if you're in other parts of the business, you can kind of create your own AI solutions. And I feel like that's something that's going to have to be governed and empowered. Eventually, we do want this decentralization of IT capabilities into the organization to some extent. And there'll be a demarcation of like junior IT projects that are okay, go ahead and develop that on your own. Or this is big enough that it needs to go up into a more centralized part of the organization. But back to your question about the 80% failure rate, what can happen is IT will develop a specialized AI solution and then they won't socialize it or roll it out properly to the rest of the organization, or like any software solution, right? It misses the mark. Like, oops, we thought it was going to do this, but it needed to do that. And so it fails. So I feel like that's a lot of it. But then there's this whole other piece of it, which is around data and data readiness. And we didn't have clean enough data, or the data wasn't ready for an AI solution. And so, it wasn't able to act the way we wanted it to act. So if I were to point to two things, those are the two things at the tip of that spear.
Yeah, that's a great point. Finding the product market fit for that is like we had this technology, it's great, it's powerful. Now, how do we use it in an effective way? How do we make use of it at our job? And I think that is still a question a lot of people are trying to understand, even within the products that people are making within their own company for other people to use. It's what products should we make? How should we use this? Like, what should we make? And I think that's something that a lot of us are figuring it out. And my question is if you could take that 80% failure and turn it into an 80% success, what do you think our jobs would look like then?
The jobs. Well, to me, it goes back to customer centricity and exactly what you were saying about we've got to find those pain points, whether we're the customers and it's within our own processes or it's external customers. Like we're spinning up these features because they're cool to do, but have we really asked the customer, where are you getting stuck? What would really move the needle on your end? And then developing to that. I just feel like customer centricity remains at the heart of it, which points to design thinking and yet another framework that we can integrate into our thinking as we're developing AI solutions.
Yeah, and I talk about this as a software engineer and architecting systems that a lot of the foundational things that we've learned still apply to AI. Maybe some things are changed. Like in one talk, I said it was kind of like a recipe that some things are added, some things you don't need as much of anymore, and some things are just changed a little. You substitute some things, and a lot of people lose sight of that when there's something new and shiny and forget we still need to make a product that's good. Or, hey, remember we did distributed systems? Well, an agentic system is also distributed, and there's some foundational things we need to consider there when we're creating these systems and these products.
Yeah, and I feel like there's a fair amount of tire kicking that actually needs to happen. Like we
Mhm.
do have to come up the learning curve of these tools and figure out like what they can do well, what they can't do well. And I feel like that's some of the J curve that we're experiencing as well, is we're going through the experimenting time where we're messing around with the tools, seeing what they can do, and we're going to have high failure rates and we're going to be slower as we figure that out before we dial it in and we start to accelerate.
That's a good point. And how do you advise companies to deal with that? Because it takes a slightly different structure than maybe it did before, because they will spend a lot of time and maybe money experimenting on products that we might expect to fail and learn something from that.
Yeah. And I'm encouraging organizations to think about innovation accounting. And so, where you're not really expecting ROI right away, but you're taking a look at how fast are we learning? What are we learning? How embedded is AI into our processes, into our organizations? And we take a look at those metrics. But of course, the headlines like to scream the failure rates and things like that, which creates a little bit of a toxic environment, to be quite honest.
Yeah. And what kind of metrics do you see people using that are helpful? Because I could imagine as Copilot was coming out, some people might take just as long to code with AI, but they're learning to code with it. AI is getting better, and it will lead to maybe more code, quicker, better code. But in the interim, maybe it's just about the same or, more time from a developer, for example. What are you seeing as these metrics to understand how AI is helping their
Yeah.
users?
Yeah, I feel like the temptation, and I've actually heard this from some organizations, they were measuring things like how many prompts people were using or the actual utilization of Copilot. And again, it's not really a helpful metric. It's like saying, well, how many people in the organization are using Microsoft Word and how many characters are they putting into it? That's not really what we want to measure. We want to measure how 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 is it improving our quality? That's a great metric. Is the quality of our code stronger? Is it less brittle? What's happening to our bugs? Are we addressing bugs more quickly? What is the backlog looking? Most IT organizations I've worked with have a backlog that extends into years, right? Like we might have a 3-year backlog, and there's always people who are upset that their projects are not getting prioritized. Are we addressing that? I feel like those are some really cool metrics along with the learning metrics that we talked about. How many experiments are being run? How are they doing? Those are the things that we should be focused on.
Yeah, it's a good point. Taking those metrics, getting good metrics, that's also a hard thing and like understanding them. I remember when Elon Musk became CEO of X, there was, I don't know if it was a rumor or if it really happened, but he was maybe judging people by the number of lines of code they've written, you know? And that alone is, you can write a lot of lines of code that aren't great, or you could make a really great, efficient understandable piece of code that has less than one that you can make longer, So I understand that finding good metrics and looking them all together, that's also definitely a difficult problem. I wanted to touch on something else you had talked about or mentioned as saying this AI time paradox. Can you explain a little bit about what the AI time paradox is and what it means?
Yeah, I've experienced this in my own life, which is I'm so busy going forward and just keeping the lights on and doing what I feel like are the things that need to be done that I don't have time to invest in learning AI.
Hmm.
The constellation of AI to me, it's like the star that exploded. And there's so many different dimensions that you could spend time researching and learning about and new tools that it just sucks up all of the time that you give it. And so this is the AI time paradox. Part of the model is centralizing the learning into these, what I call these AI activation hubs. And I know we'll talk about that more, but notion here is task the learning and the discovery to a few, and then create the systems where you can atomize the learning and get it into the right hands at the right time. And we move to this just in time, just enough, just for me model of learning in order to try and at least attempt to keep up with the learning needed for AI, because so much of it is just sorting through the options and figuring out what we should be spending our time learning.
That's a good point that if you had some people giving you a guide. I mean, I think this is about a lot of things in life, right? Like when I go somewhere to a new city to travel, I don't want to read all the reviews and do all this research about what restaurants I should go to. I just want someone I trust to tell me and I that I know their tastes to tell me these are the best restaurants to try. So you just need an engineer who's done the work, who knows how you work to tell you these are the best things to try. I think I really like that model that you mentioned.
Yeah, and this is where again organizations are falling down a little bit, because when you think about that, that requires an investment in people, either shifting somebody's role or a new role to say, okay, this is now what you're tasked to do.
Yeah. Or it's a lot of if you know, you know, just like in life about other things too. I asked an engineer on my team who's spent time on it and he shared some stuff with me, but it's not codified into something public or a recommendation, which takes a little bit more responsibility and effort.
Yeah,
So
for
I
sure.
yeah. You mentioned AI activation hubs. Can you explain a little bit about what that means as well?
Yeah, and this is part of the new infrastructure that I feel like organizations need to spin up in order to support this transition from the way we're working into the way everybody hopes we'll be working in the future. And everybody is a big word, but you know what I mean. So the notion here is that we have a network of what I'm calling the AI activation hub, and this is staffed with people who are tasked with surfacing those metrics we talked about, measuring the impact of AI, staying on top of the AI trends for their area of the business. And you can see how this model becomes fractal. You can scale it down to one hub if you are a group of 100, or you can have a whole network of these activation hubs if you're a large organization. And they're also monitoring those AI use cases, like you're saying, and creating a repository of best practices and success patterns. Ideally, that could be queried in natural language. So somebody's like, hey, I'm about to create this area of code? Is there any success patterns that I should be aware of that people have done or used? Hey, I'm about to do this, or I want to do this with AI. What are the most recent policies, internal policies around this? Where are my guardrails? Do I need a human in the loop on this? Is this okay to automate? And you can see that by spinning up these systems, we unlock the capabilities and the ability of individuals to apply AI to their jobs.
Yeah. I mean, information overload is something that, has always been something that people I think struggle to deal with, especially with AI. I mean, all the way from down the stack to up, like knowing socially what's going on, to knowing which new model is out, how to use it, even from a programming perspective, being able to keep up with all the new features and make that available to our platform and showing our users what is the best thing to use. I mean, this is a big problem that's highlighted and emphasized by AI because of the nature of AI moving so quickly,
Mhm. Yeah,
even
for
more than
sure.
software.
And so imagine you have the AI activation hub, and they know what you, Alexa, are working on. And they're like, it sounds like you're in Copilot. Copilot just released this functionality that's specific to you. I'm going to make sure you know about it. Oh, and by the way, they also just released functionality to help us do a better job scheduling meetings. And so everybody needs to know about that. And they have enough of a finger on the pulse to get hyper local and hyper personalized with those recommendations.
So how does a company do this? Do they need to hire new people? Is this a full-time job? Is this something that like is an incentive, like a promotion in a way? And do they make a pathway for someone to get rewarded for that? What does that look like?
Yeah, I'm of course a big fan of doing things gradually. And so in the beginning, as you're setting this foundation, I think you can become an AI lead while doing your day job. As we get deeper into AI and as jobs are being rewired, I do think it moves into more of a full-time effort. And my guess is that as we get more efficient, we're not there yet, there will be people who want to shift into that type of a role, or they're being told it looks like a lot of your job is being automated. There's this new opportunity that's coming up over here. Are you interested? So they may be able to do it without necessarily hiring a lot of headcount. So that's some nuance that I think will be sussed out at the enterprise level, individually as they're thinking about their organization, how much they want to fund this transition. I think the leaders will lean in. The leaders in the marketplace will lean in and fund these types of initiatives, and not every organization thinks that way.
That's a good point. So I guess it just it depends on the dynamic, but there needs to be some incentive for people to use their time to do this. When I think about work I'm putting myself into or getting into some, let's say, extracurricular at work, there's a lot of social benefit, but also given my time and the pressure because there's so much to do, you have to think, where is my time going to be of best use?
Well, for sure. And I think you brought up an interesting word, which is this is an extracurricular. And I want to be really clear that this should not be an extracurricular. So even if you aren't going to fund these roles as full time, there absolutely has to be capacity management. I think it's really unfair to say you've got a full time job and we're going to add this on top of your full time job. Like, it's not fair. It's not necessary. Let's get hyper disciplined about our time. And this is the agile discipline in me is like, let's measure our capacity. Let's fill ourselves up to our capacity, and let's say no when we're over capacity. And I think we need to get really disciplined about doing that.
Good point. I think that there are a lot of organizations that have this 80-20 time, and I think that's probably a good example that you have this 20% time to research or do other things, that would be a good example of making a good use of that 20% time and becoming a leader in your job about knowledge about AI, which is inherently beneficial as well.
Absolutely.
There was a phrase that you mentioned in our talk too, that AI learning is social learning. Can you also explain what that means?
Yeah, I think you alluded to it earlier when you're like, oh yeah, well, this engineer showed me a few things, and that could have been codified. AI learning is social learning. And it's in my mind, it's very different. I'm going to go back to our Microsoft Word example of sitting in a class about Microsoft Word where you understand what's under each of the menus and you get some understanding of the software itself. I feel AI is an act of creativity, and how you structure your prompt, how you direct AI, the instructions that you give it look very, very different for every single person. And even when you put the exact same prompt into the same LLM, the same cursor, you're going to get different outputs. And so to me, that makes it very different. The other thing that makes it very different is that the use cases feel, and probably are, endless. And so you can't really teach somebody, here are all the use cases. You can just directionally point them and say, here's some of the things you could use it for. But the magic that happens, and this is why I say AI learning is social learning, is when you get a group of people who are focused on the same set of activities and the same outcomes, thinking about AI together, you constrain the number of use cases to that area, and you're able to really learn from each other. So a great example of this comes from PricewaterhouseCoopers, and they spun up something that they called prompting parties, which those just sound fun, right? Like, let's order pizza and have a prompting party. But the notion is that you do it with the people who are connected to your work and you learn from each other. And all of a sudden, that's where you start to really unlock the value of AI versus sending everybody off to some sort of generic training course that talks about AI in theory.
There are two things I really like about what you just said. One is the prompt party. That is such a good idea because I don't think a lot of people are sharing unless asked. Generally, how are you doing your searching your prompts? How are you getting good output? And it's a common problem that I was using a certain model and I was like, this model's not working well for coding for this. And my coworker was like, oh, mine worked great. And that's kind of it. But if you had a prompt party, you could see why theirs was working better. And another thing that you said that stuck with me is about the creativity of it. It's funny because I've always thought of coding as being a bit creative because you're like, or a little bit artistic in a way. And it's funny because I had an artist who asked me, how does your mind work? I feel like mine's so different because it's artistic. And I'm sure there are a lot of visually different ways that our minds do work. It's true, it is quite a bit different. But at the same time, I do think coding is artistic or is creative, and you create something. And a lot of times it is visual, even if it's just a UI, it can be art too. And I like that you mentioned that there's creativity with how we use AI in our prompts, because being able to use it well and thinking of use cases about how to use it, that requires quite a bit of creativity.
Yeah, for sure. And those who have that natural curiosity, those who are naturally creative, I think are the ones who are leading. And it's those who have a little bit of a mental block and need to be shown the way that are struggling. And a lot of people that I talked to, I was talking to one chief AI officer, and he was talking about the divide that was happening on his engineering teams. He says, Melissa, I've got these engineers who are really leaning in, they're getting it, they're being hyper productive, they're excited. And then I have this other group that just doesn't understand how to unlock that. So I think that's another dimension of this social learning, is letting those people who are leading and have that natural curiosity light the way for those who maybe need a little bit more guidance to unlock their own innate creativity.
Yeah, it seems like prompt parties is a good way to do that. So you basically suggest that they pair with people who are able to come up with other things to kind of give them some ideas to kind of just get started, get the ball rolling about how to use it.
For sure.
Yeah, that's great. I'm curious, do you have any ways that you use AI that are particularly useful, even if it's something small that you found to be a little creative?
Well, I love having my digital teammates, and it really has shown the light on how weak I am in some areas. I've been a marketer for 25 years here, And yet, when I think about the individual skills, so there's in marketing, and I think the same applies to software, there's 42 sub-disciplines. And the same, like I see it in engineering too, right? Like you can be a really deep expert in this coding
Yeah.
language and know some of these other ones, but not at the same level. And so if you spun up experts around a programming language or around your expert tester, and then you have these personalities that you can ask very specific questions to them that know your context, know the projects you're working on, can spin these things up very easily for you. And now you have a virtual team just inside your computer. And for me, it's been pretty magical.
Yeah, I've used it to help me prepare for my talks, because
Mm.
I love voice mode.
Oh, yeah.
Voice mode's great. I use it as a coach for that, obviously, like, for presentations. One way I it's so simple, I like to use it as to create a food plan for the week
Oh,
and
yeah.
it's pretty good. I say, "Okay, I have this many dinners, this many lunches I need for this week. It's me, just one person. Help me to create something that's healthy-ish," and, like, maybe we'll go back and forth a couple times, and then it'll give me a grocery list, and then on that same thread, I'll, like, put some spices or maybe other things I have, and then how can I incorporate this? And it's pretty good at telling me, well, if you want a Mediterranean, if you want to use this, if you want it to be a bit more spicy, use this. And I think just playing around with the in those simple ways just to see how and if it can improve your life a little. I mean, I also
Yeah,
use it with styling. I'll give it a picture and be like, oh, I feel like this outfit's a little bit off here. What can I do?
that's
Based on
cool.
I mean, and it's actually pretty good, yeah, there are also, like, products around styling that are coming up that are pretty good too, but I mean, it's pretty cool if you just try what it can do, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
feel like that's the tension is that these organizations are facing, right? Because they do the hand wave, and I just wrote a LinkedIn newsletter that said, "Go play with AI is not a strategy." And yet, playing with AI can unlock the aha moments. It's just that it needs more than that. So,
yeah,
yeah, you need to play with AI, and it does do some really interesting and cool things. And then to give it some more structure, solve some of the problems that we were talking about earlier.
exactly. I think that when it translates to the work environment for me, it gets a little bit harder. There are some obvious ways, like I said, presentations or, like, helping with that, and I think a lot of people want help with work around productivity and calendar and email, but with agentic systems having access, read and write to all of your email and all your calendar is also a bit scary. So I'm excited to see where that goes, but and I think that will help productivity will be a big place that I think AI and LLMs can help.
For sure. I think the overlooked one is quality. And what I mean by that is when you really think about everything from how we run meetings, we take shortcuts. I don't do agendas all the time. I don't
Yeah.
capture the action items all the time. There's so many shortcuts we take there. But even our decision making, how deep does the customer research go? Or are we going off of one person said, "Hey, I talked to a guy yesterday"? Or have we really done the deep research we need to truly understand the customer? And I think that's the other reason why we're not seeing ROI immediately. One is the hurdles to productivity that you outlined. But I think the second one is there's so much quality deficit that we have that we need to raise the bar, and AI will help us to raise that bar first. And then we'll start to see some of these other returns on our investment.
Yeah, I think it's funny everyone wants to put a chat bot, but I don't know if everyone wants a chat bot. Sometimes I just wanna click a button, you know what I mean? I mean, I know it's useful. I'm glad it will make virtual chat and customer service probably a lot better, which is great. But you're right, it's about the product market fit. And I want to shift to talking about something that you mentioned in your book also. It's called the focus framework. Can you also explain to me what that means?
Well, this is this notion that use cases can go everywhere, and how do we help focus on the most important use cases? So I've developed this framework called Focus, and it's what is the fit, the organizational fit? Like strategically, does this AI solution make sense? What is the organizational pull? And that points to what we talked about. You could build it. Are they going to come? Does it solve a really important part of the business? The C is capability. Do we actually have the internal capabilities to make this AI thing happen, to build the chatbot, to build the automation, whatever it is? The underlying data, how is that? And this, is it ready? Do we have access to it? Can it be part of the solution? And then the S stands for success metrics. Can we actually see it move the needle on the organization? And I think by using just a simple mnemonic like that will help us sort through the endless use cases and really start to surface the ones, especially when you start talking about more elaborate ones that really require some development effort or require some attention. How do we narrow our focus to move the needle on that 80% failure rate?
I like that the mnemonic is focus. Remind me, okay, so F is
Fit, you're fit with strategy. O is the organizational pull. Will it get used? C is capabilities. Do we have the capabilities to do it? U is underlying data, and S is success metrics.
that's great. I love that. If you were giving advice to an engineer and they're working at an enterprise, maybe you have different advice if it's a startup versus a larger enterprise. Let me know if that's true. But what would you say to them if they're feeling that I want my organization to use AI better, get more involved? I feel like we're not utilizing it like we should and that we're not getting the ball rolling. What advice would you give to them?
First of all, I know better than to give a software engineer advice because I'm married to one.
But
But with that in mind, I think it's like anything. If you are trying to influence without authority, then it's all about understanding what areas of influence you have. Maybe it's firing up that Slack channel that helps with the social learning aspect of it. Maybe it's pitching the idea of a prompting party and seeing if you could make something like that happen. Maybe it is putting a whisper in a leader's ear that says, hey, I think there's some other ways that we could be approaching this. And do I have permission to research this and present you with some findings or some ideas?
yeah, that's a great point. And I think that, culturally, there's a difference between platform and practice. A lot of engineers are building these AI platforms. And how do you see this relationship between a team that's providing these tools in governments and your decentralized AI activation hubs? How do you see them balancing and working together?
So if you are a software engineer and you are tasked with embedding AI into the product, and I think that's what you meant, right?
Mhm.
I feel like those patterns are pretty established and they're working, which is, we know how to build software. We know how to use multiple experiments. We know how to focus on the customer. Keep doing that. That's working really well. Keep delivering those solutions and integrating AI into your solutions in a way that makes sense. For integrating AI into our own work, I feel like that's some of the internal cultural change that needs to be happening, and that's where the things like the AI Activation Hub start to make a lot of sense.
Yeah. So these two parts they're working with similar tooling and things, but they serve two different purposes.
I think so.
Let's shift to talking about the future of these hyper-adaptive organizations. So if we zoom out for a second, a company has followed this journey. They've set up the hubs, they have the learning loops going. What is the ideal quote unquote end state?
Yeah. Funny, I'm busy editing the book, the Hyperadaptive book, and I was just working on that end state yesterday. So it's top of mind. And so when we think about our functionally oriented organizations with lots of handoffs and delays, I see that shrinking into, and not even shrinking, just reorganizing into value stream oriented organizations where we have the cross functional groups. Finally, we're able to staff cross-functional groups of people because of the democratization of skills, right? Our skill bases get much larger. We have dynamic funding of these value streams. And I believe there's going to be three layers of the organization, kind of that mirror three layers of funding. So one is the stability layer, right? These are the platforms we invest in. These are keeping the lights on. These are the things that funding is pretty stable. And we fund those separately. The funding starts to still look informed by AI. We do a much better job of anticipating needs. The second layer is the value stream layer. And I think people move from identifying themselves as I'm a marketer to I am part of this value stream that's focused on, let's say, financial institutions, focusing on new grads who have certain financial needs. And that's how they identify themselves. That funding tends to be more dynamic. Hey, that's an increasing market. We're going to increase the funding on that. You guys are doing a great job. We want to support the increase in customer satisfaction. We're going to continue to fund that. The third layer is what I call innovation circles. And innovation circles start to operate like in your organization's internal VC firms, where people start to pitch their ideas. And Google already does this. This isn't like, ginormously new. But I think more organizations will start to do that. And as an individual, instead of climbing up a career ladder, you are going to develop a portfolio of experiences within your organization. And maybe you pitch an innovation circle and you go do that for a while, and then you come back to your value stream and you have a certain number of contributions. I think our ability to measure people's contributions just gets supercharged. Instead of doing some sort of annual review from one person that has recency bias and all the traps of reviews that we have right now, that your peers are saying, how did Alexa do this week? How was that innovation circle? What were her contributions? And you get a much richer picture of how you're doing, where you're strong, where you're weak. And because it's AI, it can give you really supportive guidance for navigating areas of opportunity.
Wow, that will be a different, more dynamic place to be. It sounds like there are a lot of opportunities. Do you ever think about how much decision making that we are giving to AI? And I wonder if you think it will be better on the whole or worse.
Well, I talk a lot about decision-making frameworks in the book and how we need to be very, very careful about abdicating these decisions to AI,
Mm.
and that we need to be very mindful about when and where and how to keep humans in the loop. And I in the very end, I talk about there's four levels of decision making, and I don't necessarily want to go into them right now, but I think it points to your comment of I wouldn't want AI autonomously making decisions about people's promotions, perhaps informing them, but I don't see a day where AI would make that on its own.
Yeah, I do think it gets a little blurry though if AI is telling you what to do and you're always doing what it tells you, then you're still making a decision, which is better than just AI making it. But I like that takeaway about having humans in the loop, and I'm interested to see in your book where all those points are. But for now, I want to ask you a final question. If you could say there is one single biggest mistake that you've seen a technical leader or C-suite executive that they can make in the next 12 months when they're trying to navigate this AI revolution, what would you say that mistake would be?
So if you are a C-suite individual, identify your North Star, identify why you're using AI. Moderna is great. They said, we want to use AI to develop 15 new drugs in 5 years in an environment where it takes 10 years to develop one drug. What a great North Star. If you are a leader who has maybe some control over your area or your budget, has some influence there, be sure to fund your support structures. This doesn't happen on its own. And if you are an individual, I would say keep being curious and keep finding ways to use AI to achieve those goals, whether it's increasing quality, increasing your work life, how it feels to you, increasing your productivity, or what's important to you?
That's a great final takeaway. Thank you so much. Thank you, Melissa. This has been a very great masterclass in organizational change, both from a sociology perspective and for tech within AI. So thank you for, deconstructing all of this for us. And your upcoming book, Hyperadaptive, Rewiring the Enterprise to Become AI Native, where can we find it and when can we expect it to come out?
Yeah, so it is available for pre-order on major book platforms, including Barnes& and Noble and Amazon. It should come out in spring of 2026, so shortly. And in the interim, you can follow me on LinkedIn, Melissa Reeve, or sign up for the newsletter at hyperadaptive.solutions.
Great. And I'll add those links in the description. Thank you so much for coming on and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. What a great conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to Alexa's Input AI. And if you want to follow along with my new episodes, writing, content, everything I'm building, you can find me at alexagriffith.com, on Substack, on YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you enjoyed this conversation, it would mean a lot if you subscribed, shared this episode with a friend, left a quick rating or a comment to help more people to discover the show and keep these conversations going. Again, I'm really grateful you're here. This podcast started as a side project for me a few years ago, and every listener who reaches out or keeps coming back reminds me exactly why I love doing this and I love putting so much time into it. I hope this episode gave you something to think about, something to talk about. So always stay curious, stay grounded, and I hope to see you next time. Thank you for your support.